Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. In this episode, we are joined by Nette Hargreaves, who is the founder of Empowered Human Design, a platform that teaches people how to use human design to empower themselves and live their best lives. Be prepared to learn what human design is, its background and origin, the 5 energy types in human design, how understanding our energy type is fundamental to understanding human design, how our not self theme is key to managing our energy type, how to live a human design inspired life despite social conditioning, norms, and the beliefs that get passed down to us all, and of course, so much more. Before that though, this episode is brought to you by Riverside. Riverside is an online studio platform designed to record, edit, and share high quality podcasts built for growth from day one. Powered by AI, you can record 4K video or from your phone and automatically remove filler words such as ums, as, yeah, no's, and many other speech patterns. Built for human conversations, Riverside makes it super easy to start a podcast. That sounds great. Ready to start your podcast? Check out the link in the show note description to learn more about Riverside. Get a 15%, yes, a 15% discount off a paid subscription. Now to today's episode. Nessa, welcome to Raising Consciousness today. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm very excited to be here. Feels
First
like a long
question.
time since we first met.
Yeah, no, it was way back in, obviously, depending when people are watching or listening to this, I think it was way back in the summer we've had the conversation when your book actually was coming out, because I was looking back through some of the email exchange and stuff. I won't bore our audience with that. And you mentioned that, your book was coming out, and that was July, I think, was it?
Yeah, it first came out in July.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's good to finally make this happen. And my first question for you is, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, so I'm Nette Hargreaves and I work with human design. So my business is called Empowered Human Design, and I called it that because even though I love human design, I'll be the first one to admit that when you first sort of Google it or when you first look at it, it can appear very complex and very confusing. So I wanted to make it empowering for people, and I wanted to take this very complex thing and help people to just apply it in everyday life in like small practical steps. So that's what I do.
And why do you do what you do?
Because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I was. And actually, the truth of it is, I used to bumble along in life and go, yeah, I'm great. I'm like really good with who I am, and I'm doing all the things I love, and life is good and life is exciting. And then I had a kid. And then it was like, oh, right. Life is different when you have another human being that you're supposed to look after. And I actually went from being this fairly free spirited person to someone who had to unpick a boatload of conditioning around what it means to be a parent. So I found myself all of a sudden dealing with narratives around, like, well, now that you have a parent, you can't be this free spirited, bouncy person that you used to be. You now have responsibilities and you have to be structured and you have to prioritize this life that you've created. And some of that came from me and my own upbringing, and some of that came from, just what we believe in society, what it means to be a good parent. And I actually found it really hard to unpick all of that. And the reason I wanted to unpick it so desperately is because I actually didn't really feel like I was being fully myself anymore. And that wasn't a good feeling in my body, and that's not how I wanted to live my life, and that's certainly not what I wanted to role model for my child.
You mentioned there what you do. Empowered Human Design is the name of your brand. Most people listening to this would have no idea what human design is. So what is human design and why does it matter?
Okay, great question. So human design, the way I look at it, is a way of understanding yourself. It's basically like your own energetic blueprint, and it is specific to you alone. So there are some things that are like, there's like general categories called energy types that apply to many people. But beyond that, when we look at what's called your human design chart, it's really about how does your energy tick? How does Nette's energy tick? How does Luke's energy tick? And also what happens when you put those two energies together as you would in, friendships, relationships, parenting. So what I find particularly fascinating is when we look at our own energy and we somehow see it in a graph or in a chart, and then someone walks us through it, or we discover, like, what does that mean about myself? There's something that it unlocks in you, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, yes, I see myself in this. And this is really like who I would be if I didn't have roles or responsibilities. And it's like this extra level of permission to really step into who we are and own it. And that was my experience. Discovering my human design helped me to own who I already was on a new level.
Why does that matter?
Does that
Like,
resonate?
it does, it does. And but like, why does it matter for the person who's on the other end of this? Like, why should they care about human design? Why should they care about our conversation today?
Why should you care about this conversation? See, it's one of those things that for my own human design, I struggle with answering because it's so obvious to me and it makes so much sense in my own body that I almost like assume it has to make sense for everybody. So if I was going to take a step back to when I was really struggling, like recovering and reclaiming my own identity as a new parent, I did go through the process of like slowly chipping away of like, okay, what is me? What is not me? What are all these narratives? What are all these stories that don't belong to me and that don't make me feel good about myself? And I got there, but it probably took me about 5 years. And then I found human design and it was like, oh, it's like the shortcut. It's basically like my 5 years of personal work condensed into like one modality. The other reason you should care is like when I work with people and I explain their human design and I sort of open up this way of understanding yourself, what most people end up experiencing is like, oh, if I do life this way, all of a sudden life feels easier. Like rather than plodding along, or rather than like really like feeling like you're swimming upstream all the time, all of a sudden like life feels easier, opportunities drop in and amazing stuff happens because I'm in alignment with my own energy. And that's pretty much the feedback I'm getting most of the time when I'm working with women. It's like, oh, it gets to be easy. Oh, I get to follow my intuition or my gut feeling or whatever my way is of like making decisions or whatever my way is of exchanging my energy. And what you find is once you follow that, life just feels like it's more in flow and it's joyful.
Mm. So on a personal level, I resonate with a lot of that, and obviously going through
Mm,
before this episode, we've kind of done my human design chart, and I've got so many questions about that. Dive into it, kind of use mine as a little bit of a case study for our conversation
yeah.
today. Before that, though, kind of building on that, I'm a little bit assuming, so maybe I shouldn't assume, but like you've probably come across skeptics, people who are skeptical of
Yeah.
human design. I'm not in the business of trying to convince people that something is true or not true.
Yeah.
However, like I want to do everything that I can to help people while they're here in this form of being human, right? To enjoy their human experience, to live their best life possible, right? And for me,
Yeah.
being open to new concepts and ideas like human design, I think is very important in allow for us to be able to do that. So, how
Mm,
do you navigate conversations or uh, navigate people who are skeptical of human design, maybe skeptical of like anything to do with energy, and believe that you maybe they're more scientific led, right? Like they need the data or something. And what would like your
yeah.
message be to them to help them to start to become more open to what we're talking about, to what we would dive into a lot more, what we will dive into a lot more of in terms of human design, if that makes sense, because I'm sure people are listening to this be like
Yeah.
are very skeptical, and I'm sure you've met those people as well.
Yeah. And the first thing I would say, it's good to be skeptical. There's no expectation that anyone that has never heard of human design will all of a sudden go, oh my god, this can like change my life. And even the founder of human design said, is when you look at it, it's meant to be a tool to uplift you and support you. So if there's something that you find out about yourself and you go, you know what, I don't resonate with that, don't do it. And what I often find is, maybe someone, when I first meet someone, maybe they resonate like with one aspect and not something else. And it's like, that is totally cool. Maybe come back to the aspect you don't resonate with so much in another couple of weeks' time or in another couple of months' time. See if anything's changed about your perspective. So I would certainly, welcome people to ask questions. And that's to me also, that's where the exciting thing is. You ask me questions, I answer them. There's like a dialogue, and it's not this feeling of like, oh, this is limiting or this is putting me in a box, because that's the opposite of what human design is here to achieve.
You mentioned there the founder, so can you give us like a potted history of human design, like its origins, like where it came from? Um,
Yeah,
and then we'll dive into my chart just so people kind of understand, its background
yeah,
in that.
absolutely. And also in human design, there's definitely people who, where you can see in their chart, they need more of the detail, they need more of the deep diving. There's other people who just kind of bumble along and know stuff. There's people who really need to get like hands on and experience things in order for it to make sense of them. So that's also the beauty, that we all learn in different ways. So human design is basically like, the reason I feel it's so powerful is because it isn't just one system. It's actually a way of layering systems on top of each other, or like understandings of energy on top of each other that have been around for millennia. So you've got part of what makes up human design is the I Ching. That's like a very ancient Chinese way of understanding archetypal energies. Then you have the chakra system. You have a part of the Kabbalah, and then you have astrology. And the astrology piece isn't like, oh, you are Cancer with Leo rising. The astrology piece is actually really looking at, okay, what energies were activated within these other systems at the time of your birth? And then what does that mean about your energy? So that's where it comes from. So, in terms of the history of human design, it was, I guess, downloaded is probably the way to put it. It wasn't like discovered or made up. It was literally someone who, at the end of the 80s, had this download of how all these different systems could be layered on top of each other. And then basically devised over time, devised systems of sharing that with other people. And that's where what we now see today as a human design chart came from.
So, talking about human design chart, I have mine in front of me. I will display it on the screen for those who are watching, and for those who are listening, head on over to YouTube if you want to see the chart. So this is my chart that you kindly uh, I like. What's the process in terms of getting a chart? Because you asked for my date of birth, and for me to be very, very
Yeah.
specific on kind of date of birth, time, birthplace, etc. So, what's the process in getting this chart? And then we'll break it down.
Yeah, great question. So this is another reason why I love human design, is because it runs a chart based on your birth details. So what you're looking at is your birth date, your birthplace, and your birth time. Ideally, you want your birth time to be as accurate as possible. However, if you are someone who doesn't have an exact birth time, or who only knows like shadowy details, like I was born in the morning, I was born in the evening, there's definitely ways of playing with your human design chart and narrowing it down to a window of what's likely. So the reason I find human design so accurate is not just because it has these multiple systems layered together, but also it's based on something subjective, or sorry, it's based on something objective. So there's obviously a lot of ways of understanding our energy. There's, there's Myers-Briggs, there's the DISC model, there's Enneagram, there's numerology. There's so many ways out there of understanding ourselves. And, a lot of them are brilliant and really supportive. Um, but I also know from taking a lot of these tests that you have to like answer questions. You sort of do a questionnaire. And I always think, like, as much as we try not to, we are a little bit subjective with these sorts of things, because we also want to kind of like maybe not always be so honest about the pieces of ourselves that we're not accepting as much. So it's really easy to go, well, yeah, I'm more like this and less like that. Um, so there is that sort of level of subjectivity, whereas when you put in your birth details, there's really nothing that you can be subjective about because they are what they are.
Yeah, so for those who are watching, I'm just displayed it's my chart on the screen right now. So very confusing for the person, for someone who is going to come across this for the very first time. So like
Yes.
break this down for us. So what's the first thing people receive this? What's the first thing that you think is the most important to understand to start to try to make sense of this?
Yeah. And you know what, Luke? I mean, I was right in that boat. When I first heard about human design, of course, I went to Google and I looked at it and I ran my chart and I literally went, what the, um, enter your favorite swear words here. And I just immediately went, I can't. It's too complicated and I don't want to Google it because I'll go down a rabbit hole. And I just left it for several months and then eventually sort of came back to it and went, I'm going to find someone who makes sense of this for me. And I had a reading with someone and went, oh, this is what this very complicated thing is all about. So when you look at your human design chart, the first thing you really want to look at is your energy type. And the reason you want to do that is because understanding your energy type is kind of like the foundation of everything. So, whatever your energy type is, it tells you something about how you're meant to exchange energy with the world around you. Um, and if you can follow those ways of exchanging energy with the world around you, then it's almost like most everything else in your chart will fall into place. So, I would always say, start with your energy type and understand what that means for you and understand how you can show up more in alignment with your energy type in everyday life. So, for example, you're a generator.
Yeah.
I'm what's called a manifesting generator. Again, I'll be the first one to say that these terms are complicated. They're not like endearing, they're not like easy on the tongue. So, the invitation is to look past these technical sounding terms and really become curious of like, what does it mean? So, for example, for people like you and me, it's all about we're exchanging energy with the world by basically following our gut feeling. We're like looking for things, like we're looking for clues that come into our world that we find exciting, that we feel drawn towards, and we take actions based on those clues. And then things happen that we might not imagine otherwise. So I'll give you an example because it sounds abstract, right? So about a year ago. So most of last year, I was really like caught in this brain fog and like, it's like, what am I doing? And I can't think for like more than 15 minutes straight. And it was a bit boring. It's called menopause. Um, and then I sort of got to about this time last year and I started to feel like my energy was sort of I was coming back to myself energetically and I didn't feel so lost. And I was in a networking group, and the question was, what are you going to do for the fourth quarter of this year? And just completely intuitively, I just blurted out, I'm finally going to bring out my parenting by human design work. And it's almost like I looked at myself like, oh, you're really going to do that, right? And then because I know my energy, it was like, right, I have to take an action straight away before that energy fizzes out. So it wasn't a matter of like going to my head and it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Like, what programs am I going to develop? Or, you know, what am I going to offer to people? Because quite often when we have those inspirations, it's very tempting to then like go, okay, well, I have to create an offer. And in order to create the offer, I have to like create the whole thing. And then I have to create the marketing and then I have to market it. And I've done that so many times. And my experience is by the time I've done all of that and I start marketing it, I start telling people what it is, all my excitement has gone into the creation. It's kind of like run itself out. So I've learned I need to take action straight away. So I went, right, I'm going to have a coffee morning. I'm just going to invite a bunch of parents and I'm going to share what human design can do for them as parents. And I'm going to find out what they want because that gives me something to respond to energetically. Based on that interaction, then people said, right, well, we want a group course. Like, we want to understand what human design can do for us, but we want to do it in a group where we can exchange our experiences, where we can feel like validated and heard. So that's it, right? I'm going to do this parenting course. And as a supplement, I'm going to write a little ebook for every course section. So you have something to refer back to. And then I started writing, and I kept writing and writing and writing and writing. And all of a sudden, like 3 months later, I looked at all this stuff I'd written and I was like, that's not an ebook anymore. That's a book. And it was like, shit, now I'm writing a book. And I just kept following the clues. It's like this magical breadcrumb trail. If I had said a year ago, I'm going to write a book, it would have been so overwhelming. I would have never done it. Like, I couldn't have imagined doing that, but because I just followed the clues and I took action when I felt guided to, it happened. Does that resonate?
Yeah, and I've got a lot of questions around this, especially for generators, but there are different energy types other than just
Absolutely.
generators. So if we finish on generators, then I can go dive into my questions for generators, because as we alluded to there, I am a generator. I'm kind of using this chart, my chart, as like a little bit of a case study. So if we finish on generators, and I can ask my questions around that, what are the energy types and some like traits of that energy type, so people can maybe start to see themselves in what energy type, if that makes sense?
Should I give you an analogy, or should I give everyone an analogy that
Sure.
encompasses all the
Yeah.
energy types so it's inclusive? Right. So the analogy that I use that most often resonates with people is around music. So if you imagine that there is a composer creating a piece of music. Yeah, so they have this inspiration to create a piece of music, and they're basically making something from nothing. They're creating something that wasn't there before. So they follow their impulse and then they describe it into notes and scales. So that would be in human design. That's the energy of what's called a manifester. So that's all about starting things, like creating things that weren't there before, initiating things. But now you have a piece of music, but in and of itself, that's just a piece of paper with some notes on it, right? So in order to bring the whole thing to life, you actually need an orchestra. And typically an orchestra would be made up of generators and manifesting generators. That's like the life force. Those are the people that are going to take this idea and actually ground it in reality. But then also, you need someone who's going to look at those two components, so the music and the orchestra. You need someone who's going to bring those two together. So that will be a conductor. So a conductor would look at the music and would look at the orchestra and just put those two together to create something exciting. And they would be like, okay, well, in order to make this impactful, we need to have like violins louder over here. And then we need to have the drums, but kind of like coming in really softly and building up. So they take that, they have this magical overview of how to optimize the whole thing. So that's a conductor. So in human design terms, that would be a projector. And then once the piece of music is performed, you would have the audience. And in the audience, you have a critic. And the critic is the one who experiences the final product. And then they go, I loved it because of this, or I didn't love it because of that. So in human design terms, that will be a reflector. And then you can also probably already, just by the analogy, you can work out that, the orchestra, the generators and manifesting generators, they make up the biggest portion of this exchange, because it's that life force energy that's needed for the creative process. Whereas the manifestor, the projector, and the reflector, so the composer, the conductor, and the critic, there's less of them because they fulfill a different purpose. They bring a different energy.
It's interesting where my mind went from a generator kind of perspective, because I like creating stuff, or like, so I have a lot of ideas, and so I like to kind of like I guess start stuff, but then I'm not necessarily a finisher, right? So like I start stuff and then I'm like, okay, you know, and like from like more of a business context, like that might be like, start a business or an idea, and then you have someone who runs it, and then I can like go and pursue another idea, and actually going with that energy. How does that work with like a generator? Because it sounds like they're not they're not the their role isn't necessarily to create something from scratch, using the analogy that you gave.
That's a good point. So it's less about that you can't create something from scratch. It's more about how you start the creative process. So again, if I come back to the whole book process, I was responding to kind of this impulse. I was kind of following these clues that kind of opened up something that wasn't there before, versus sitting down one day and going, right, like logically, what am I going to do for the rest of this year? Oh yes, I'm going to write a book. Right, what does that mean? I need a plan and I need a structure. It's it's the same outcome, but it's a different energy that goes into the creative process. So just because you're a
Mm,
generator doesn't mean you can't create. It doesn't mean that you can't make amazing things happen. It's more about, well, what's the starting point here? And how
mm.
am I going to follow these clues in a way that makes it feel easy? Because we can all do all the things. It's just about, which road are we taking? Are we taking the rocky road? Are we taking the smooth road?
So if a manifester was to write your book, what would their steps be, and how would those steps be to yours and a generator's steps, if that makes sense?
Um, so if you're a manifester, you're basically the only energy type that doesn't have to like wait for anything to respond to. It's more like you get this urge to do something and you just do it. Um, I will give you a manifestor analogy though, because some manifestors are really about initiating stuff. What I never really properly understood, I mean, I understood it in theory, but I had never experienced it, partly because manifestors are relatively rare, is manifestors can also initiate other people. So when I had my manuscript, I actually made sure that I had like one person of a different energy type test read it. And then when the feedback came, so my manifestor test reader, I adore her. And she was like, yeah, yeah, no, it's brilliant and it's good. And then the one thing she said, almost like as a side note, is she was like, well, in some parts, it's all a bit technical, it's all a bit complicated, but I guess that can't be helped. And I sort of read that and went, ah, totally hear you, totally know, like intuitively what sections you're talking about. And yes, it can be helped because I can make it easier and I can take stuff out that doesn't need to be there for the average reader. And that was almost like my first experience being initiated by a manifester. And
Mm.
it's really, really powerful.
We get back talking to Netta in just one moment, but before we do so, I would just like to take a quick break to mention Real Superfoods. Real Superfoods is on a mission to make superfoods more accessible and convenient for everyone. They've just sent me this, their magic matcha, which is delicious as a latte and something that I wanted to try for a very long time, and great if you're looking for better focus and a clearer mind. It has the added benefit of lion's mane mushroom, it is 100% organic, and uses only the highest quality ceremonial grade Japanese matcha available. I would highly recommend this product if you're looking for something different to your morning cup of coffee that's going to give you calm energy throughout the day and not leave you with a caffeine crash. Learn more about Real Superfoods and get 20% off your first purchase with code Luke Burrows, my name, by going to the link in the show note description. Now, let's get back to today's episode. Turning our attention to generators. So going through your course as well, and I'll link that down below so people can sign up for that if they want to explore this further. One of the things that stood out for me was that for generators, it's important to say no to the things that we don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that's kind of, protect our energy. And, when there's times when I've been doing things I don't want to do, then, I notice a huge kind of dip in my energy and going through the course. I made some
Yeah.
connections there. I got kind of brought up in the notion that during our life, there's going to be things we don't want to do. How do you generators navigate this? And like when we're exploring human design, and then we have all these societal kind of and cultural beliefs that we've kind of that's got kind of passed down on us.
Yeah.
Like that one. Maybe people, believe that, sometimes life is hard, so they're hearing you and kind of saying, this is an easy way to do life. Like, they're not gonna, that's kind of, they have that belief, right? Um,
Mm.
so yeah, I guess my question is like, how do we navigate being a generator, with like with that belief, if that makes sense? Like, how can we make that
Yeah,
work for us?
yeah, that makes complete sense. So I think the first thing I would say in answer to that question is, it sounds beautiful. Like, you live life in more flow and more alignment and like everything's beautiful. And I know we've all experienced those moments, right? So to me, understanding your human design is not about having this expectation that life becomes like a 24/7 highlight reel. Like life is always going to have moments that are difficult. Our energy is always going to be up and down. Um, my experience is like what human design has allowed me to do is to understand myself at such a deep level and to actually like love and appreciate myself at such a deep level without being conceited, without thinking that I'm like better than anyone else. It's just like I really like who I am. And when the chips are down and when life is a bit shit, I can look at it and go, you know what? Things aren't great right now, but I'm still great. And it's again, it's a subtle different energy. It's like, yes, I'm down in the trenches, but I'm not going down with the ship. It's like I still have this really, really solid knowing that I'm okay as a person and things are going to shift and there's going to be the ups again. And it's just almost like appreciating that, like, even when the chips are down, we're still okay. It's subtle, but energetically, it makes a huge difference because what happens for so many of us is like when the chips are down or when things aren't going our way, the stories start running in our head. I'm not good enough. Like, why did I try this to begin with? Like, I'm just never going to make it. Other people have already done it. And all these little stories run in our head. But when we really believe that, like, we're unique and what we have to bring to the world is unique in big ways and in small ways, it kind of quiets down that chatter. And oftentimes, like, that's enough to make us feel like, we got this thing called life, even when it's not going beautiful and even when it's not what we would share, like, with the world and on social media. That
Yeah.
being said, I
Mm.
will totally own that there's always going to be things in life that we don't want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my take on it is if I can follow my energy and put my energy into the things that excite me most of the time, it's regenerative, right? Like when we all know that when we do things that we feel good about, it kind of like regenerates its own energy. So I think if we spend enough of our time focusing on what we really want to bring to the world, when it gets to the stuff that we don't want to do, like, I don't know, the tax return, cleaning the house, whatever it is for us, we've got more energy to work with. And then the other
Mm.
thing that I do with things that I really don't enjoy, like housework, not my vibe, I try to make it fun. I try to make it simple and I try to make it fun. So you will never find me cleaning my entire house. I will do bits and pieces, like one room at a time, and I'll get music on and I'll set myself a time limit. And it's like, okay, here's this thing that I really don't want to do. I want the outcome, I just don't want the process. But I'm not going to let it become an energy drain. I'm going to keep it short and I'm going to try to make it fun. When I
Yes.
do stuff for other people, I will do stuff I find fun. Like a friend of mine, she needed some help getting her gym ready for sale and she had some sort of hiccups along the way. And I showed up there and I helped her paint. I like painting. It's fun. Again, it's a beautiful day. We had the windows open, we had the music going. That's an energy where, like, I come and I help you, but I'm also having fun myself. If
Mm.
you had asked me to come, like, take the wallpaper down or scrub the floors, that wouldn't have been fun. So, yes, I could have come and helped you, but the energy I bring is much more buoyant when it's also something I want to do.
Yeah, so many points there. I think in like summary for me, it's like energy management, like using this to manage your energy. And it's kind of like linked into some things that I've been exploring. which is like how I set up my days, or etc. So there was this article I came across that not necessarily related to human design, but I can see where human design kind of fits into it in terms of like
Mhm.
identify, like all the things that give you energy, all the things that drain or take your energy away, and then like start the day with something that gives you energy. Never do. And then like the article I was reading was like highlighting, so like energy givers was like green and energy takers was like red, right? So you never do two tasks back to
Mhm.
back that are red because they're energy drainers. And so then you're basically not going to be your
Excellent.
best self, right? And kind of designing your life in this way. And I can kind of see where human design can fit into that. And it's interesting, like obviously your mind went to the things that you don't like to do in terms of housework, etc. But a lot of people don't like to do the things that they know that are good for them or for us, right? So for example, they might not like
Mm.
exercise, but we know that actually as human beings we need exercise. We're like designed to move, right? And so I can see
Yeah.
how we can apply this to things that we don't like to do, even if those things are good for us, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And especially as generators and manifesting generators, because we have this life force energy, exercise and movement is actually really good. Because if we do too many things that like don't fulfill us, or even if we do stuff that we love, we have so much energy, and it's good to kind of move it. And sort of my take on it is definitely that, movement is a great thing, and it doesn't have to be a set exercise routine. It can be whatever feels good for you. So
Mm.
I'm in a co-working space, and we have like a lunchtime break every day where, like, today we went walking. When it's my turn, I get people hula hooping, or I get people dancing. Somebody else is like bringing yoga. So it's whatever feels good for you. But I'm definitely a big proponent of the moving our body, because that's our vehicle.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick up, if it's
Mm.
okay, on something that you said earlier, because I
Sure.
feel it wants answering. So you said that, you are someone who has a lot of ideas, and, you start things, and then maybe you kind of at one point you pivot. That's also a way of following your energy. Because if something, like if you decided you're going to offer something to the people you work with, and you pour all your energy into it, and then sort of like halfway through you get a nudge that says, actually, if you made a tweak or a little pivot, it would actually work so much better for yourself, and also for the people that you bring your work to. It's like, make the pivot. It doesn't mean because the marketing copy said X, you can't flip it and deliver Y. Because energetically, I've found time and again, like even when people have done that on programs where I've been a paid customer, it just opens up something that benefits everyone when we can be tuned into like the way we want to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because like at the moment I don't necessarily feel like that's been my experience. I feel like changing my mind quite a lot of times, and pivoting has actually held me back in some way. Although what I would say as a caveat to
Mm.
that is that it's allowed me to discover more of like truly like who I am and actually what I actually want. Um, so maybe, and so it was actually a little bit kind of one of the questions I was going to ask about kind of like short term and long term. Maybe in like the short term in this period of my life, it's kind of led to not the success that I dreamed of or that I've kind of wanted, but longer term, maybe it could lead to something because then I'm more self aware on actually who I am, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so like one of the questions I was going to ask was in terms of like that short and long term. So it kind of, and what I mean by that is like for me, like over the long term, a lot of people maybe just fall into just doing the things that they don't like to do day after day, like the hard stuff, and over years and decades that
Yeah.
drains their energy, right? That um creates their life, they're unhappy, they're in that dead end job, etc., and they're miserable and not living their best life. But it sounds
Mm.
like actually throughout our life we're going to have those moments where with those like difficult challenging moments, and it sounds like human design isn't saying that life is always going to be sunshine and rainbows. We're going to have those smaller moments in like the short term that are going to be challenging, but it's more about the long term of like designing your life in the way in the way of your energy, in the way that you're naturally designed.
Yeah.
That's kind of like how I'm perceiving it.
Yes. Yes. And also, we talked about energy types earlier. So what I love is like every energy type has a feeling that tells them. So every energy type has a feeling that says, okay, like if you're a generator, this is the feeling to tell you that you're feeling like that life is in alignment, that you're doing kind of life the way you're supposed to, right? And then also every energy type has a feeling that basically says, you know what? This isn't going so well. Like this is becoming the swimming upriver, treading treacle thing. And when I talk about these feelings, again, it's like, when you're feeling that, it's never a bad thing. It's never something to be completely avoided. It's just like, oh, right, I'm feeling like this. Where can I pivot? Where can I tweak? Or maybe I just need to stop for a while. Like, maybe I just need to take a little step back, give myself a bit of grace and recalibrate to my own energy, and then look at this thing again from a whole new level.
And so, from a generator's perspective, I read that that's frustration.
Yeah.
So it's also called the not self theme, I believe. So how do
Yeah.
generators navigate frustration? And that's really interesting because when I do feel frustrated, I'm like, I feel so far away from who I am, type of thing. Where when I am in that
Yeah.
frustrated state, and then I would get like annoyed with myself for feeling frustrated, which leads to more frustration, and then you kind of go around in this circle.
Yeah.
And then you go into like a social environment,
Totally
or you're
relate.
with friends or family, and you're just like this irritable person because you're so frustrated, right? Just leads
Yeah.
to this circle. So how do generators navigate frustration? And then yeah, and then if you have any tips for how
Hmm.
the other energy types navigate their not self theme.
So, with generators and manifesting generators, so this not self theme, this feeling is called frustration. So frustration can be like that kind of frustration. It can also be just a little bit annoyed, like everyone kind of annoys me. I feel a bit niggled. I feel a bit triggered. Also, if like long term, if we end up doing things that really don't regenerate our own energy, it can actually feel like pretty stagnant. So I remember when I was in this new mum phase that I talked about earlier, when I just kind of felt like, oh, I'm not really sure who I am anymore. I'm like doing all the doing, but I'm not really in touch with who I am. I just felt like I felt tired all the time. It's like, when you have those periods where no matter how much you sleep, you feel tired, or you kind of just feel like low level achy in your body. That can also be like this stagnant frustration. That can also be a sign that, it's maybe time to pivot. So that's frustration. So again, I think what human design has done for me is when I'm in those places, I see it more as an invitation. It's like, like I'm not quite feeling myself, or I'm kind of feeling out of touch with myself. Like what's not working for me here? And I look at the situation separate from myself, if that makes sense. So it doesn't become that negative story of like something's wrong with me because I'm feeling frustrated. No, nothing's wrong with me. I'm just putting my energy in places that maybe doesn't work for me. But it doesn't mean that I'm broken as a person. So again, to me, what human design does is when you develop this relationship of like looking at yourself differently, and seeing where you're unique and where you are brilliant, it invites us to stop all that mind chatter and all those stories that we latch onto about, why we need to change or why we aren't as good as other people, or, everyone knows that mind chatter, right?
Yeah.
So for generators and manifesting generators, that mind chatter leads to frustration. For projectors, so projectors are basically here to share their wisdom with people around them. So projectors have this amazing ability to look at situations, whether they're like processes, practical things, or like dynamics between people. It's like projectors always have like this laser vision, and they really see sort of beyond what's happening on the surface to sort of what's happening energetically behind. So projectors are meant to share their wisdom, but they're meant to share their wisdom with people who are open to it. So when we talk about how projectors want to exchange energy with the world, it's about like, you're waiting for this energetic invitation that says, hey, you have wisdom, tell me what you see. And the reason that's important is because projectors are so wise and they see so many things, if they just like blurt around and go, well, this isn't working, and this over here, this dynamic is off. Like if people aren't open to it, it's a bit like, whoa, that's a lot. I didn't ask for that. And then we kind of reject that wisdom. And then if you're the projector giving that wisdom, you then feel rejected yourself, or you feel like you're not being listened to, you're not being seen, like people aren't appreciating like what you have to give to the world. So this is the feeling for projectors. In classical human design, it's called bitterness, but it's more that feeling like I'm not being recognized, I'm not being valued. So that's really important for projectors. So, and I've been on the receiving end of projector wisdom that I didn't ask for, and it was like literally, whoa, like I can see that you're right, but like you're kind of going in with a sledgehammer. Whereas if I'm asking for people's advice, I'm just already, as a starting point, I'm more open. And then when it lands, it's like, damn, you're wise and you're seeing the stuff that I couldn't see. So that's projectors. So for manifestors, so we talked about earlier, like this manifestor energy being likened to a composer. So it's this like very big energy of like taking initiatives and having an impact in the world. Of course, we all have an impact in the world in our own different unique ways, but it's almost like for manifestors, it's amplified. And especially like for manifestor children, a very common shadow side is becoming people pleasers, because there's no room for like this big impactful energy. So manifestors tend to make themselves small. And when that happens, you feel different levels of angry. So it can either be like this angry outburst, or you're just feeling almost like a bit rebellious. You're kind of feeling caged in, and you're going to take like some actions to kind of break out of that cage. So this anger in manifestors can be really strong. And anger is a difficult emotion for people to deal with, right? So we don't, as a society, we don't deal with anger particularly well. So there's a lot of narrative around, like, when, especially when children get angry, when women get angry, it's not a welcome energy. So as a manifester, it's almost like making friends with your anger. And when you start to feel that, it's like, oh, right, like where am I putting my energy that doesn't feel good? Or maybe I'm putting my energy out in the world, but I'm trying to like do all the things and do all the doings of the people around me. Like I'm trying to be the orchestra when I'm the composer, right? And for manifestors and projectors and for reflectors, because they don't run off that same orchestra type energy, their energy is much more cyclical. So they are massively powerful when their energy is on. But in order to get to that point when their energy is on, they actually need to spend a fair bit of time like pulling back and being in their own energy and being a little bit removed from the doing. So for manifestors, they feel variations of angry. For reflectors, so the equivalent of the critic, very, very, very rare energy types, only about 1% of people. And when life isn't going well for a reflector, they just feel disappointed, disillusioned, disappointed, a bit blah about life.
How do generators develop the courage to say no? Going back to kind of one of the points I alluded to beforehand, in terms of we want to say no to the things we don't want to be doing, so let's say work on this project, right? Or I don't know. So somebody asks them to do something, they really don't want to. So actually, as an example from my own life, growing up, never been into clubs, drinking, etc. But
Yeah.
when I was 19, 20, my friends, that's what they wanted to be doing, right? I knew that wasn't for me, even without stepping in that place. I just knew.
Yeah.
So I didn't go, but I had this guilt for not going, right, some of the times, and then I would like feel
Hmm.
bad, like, am I strange, am I weird, kind of all these sorts of questions come
Yep.
up, right? Then there's been other times,
Yeah.
more when I've been in the work environment, obviously having a boss in like more 9 to 5 culture land, and give me a task to do, and I just haven't wanted to do it, not for any logical reason, just because feeling energy, right? Like it's just not something I want to do, and like battling in that because you are actually in the workplace, and so they are paying you, right? That kind of thing. So like, and then situations kind of outside of the work environment as well. Again, back to friends and kind of family and stuff, and just overall a consensus for me is like just having this hard time of having the courage to say no. So being in situations and in environments where I really don't want to be, and then that leads
Yeah.
later down the line. I think that's actually one of the reasons why, um, way back in my younger days, when I was like 19, 20, I entered this kind of state of chronic anxiety and depression, etc. Because like I was just totally that yes person, right? Um,
Yeah.
so, so my bottom line is I've had this problem of saying no, learning about human design and kind of my energy types. I've kind of realized that it's important for me as a generator to say no and to do the things I want to do. But I haven't had the courage to say no. So like, what tips,
Yeah.
words of wisdom, advice do you have for?
One of my favorite topics. And it's really refreshing to actually hear someone talk about this, like I'm having this difficulty saying no outside of sort of my world of, predominantly working with like women entrepreneurs and parents. Um, I think one of the things we feel is like we're being nice when we say yes, right? Other people are going to like us when we say yes. And the truth of it also is every time we say yes, when it's an internal no, it's almost like I'm saying yes to you and the thing you want. But at the same time, I'm saying no to myself and what I know to be true, right? So there is definitely that element of courage. Um, when I talk about saying no, I always talk about like say no with love and grace. Like you don't have to be, angry about it, or you don't have to give a long story. So like great phrases to use is like, I just don't have energetic capacity for that right now. Um, I use that a lot when it comes to like, in my world, it can be outside of, my work when it comes to me being a parent. It can be things like, oh, it's the school fair and like, who's going to bake a cake and who's going to man the stall. And I will just go, you know what? I am only going to show up and do the things that I want to do. So, no, I'm not going to participate in every activity that school wants me to participate in. But when I participate in the things I want to do, I am 100% there and I bring my whole self. So, yeah, I'll go away on the class trip for 5 days because that is fun. And then I'm there and I'm like in my element and I'm actually bringing my energy to make the thing better, to contribute. Whereas, if I manned a stall with the activity that I actually rather slip my wrist doing, yes, I'm there doing the thing and it fulfills a purpose, but I'm not bringing the energy that's going to light everyone else up around me. Like people are not going to have fun folding stars with me if I'd rather be in the bath with a book, right?
Right. No.
So
Yeah.
I think it's baby steps, but it's also understanding that, you know, in a way, we're doing everyone a favor when we bring our whole selves and like our whole energy to what we want to do rather than doing it like by halves. Like if you go to the party and you don't really want to be at the party, you're going to spend most of your time like floating around in the background. Or maybe you have some so conversations and it's like, yeah, okay, I talked to Luke, that was fine. But when you're there and you want to be there, you bring a whole level of magnetism that it's like, wow, I had a conversation with Luke and he is so interesting. And this is the stuff that he's doing. And this is what he's really interested in. It's just a different vibe. And it's this permission to actually like lift others up by your energy, like be these energetic leaders, as opposed to just doing it out of habit or duty or obligation.
Do you think that's a part of
But
the
it's also,
challenge that people don't give themselves the permission to like live and embrace life this way? And I'm thinking like mostly because of societal pressure and conditioning
yeah.
that we've been ingrained with and brought up by, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's this really interesting thing. So I also collaborate with a teen parenting coach. We do workshops together, and we basically plan to do a workshop in, I believe it was September, and then we had an online workshop planned for October. And the one in September, like it wasn't taking off, and we were like half-ass marketing it, and it's like my heart wasn't in it. I was focusing on other stuff. Her heart wasn't really in it, but we kind of sort of kept plodding along. And at one point, I actually had a weekend where I was dancing at too many weddings and my energy was really run down. And I left a message for my collaborator. Like I left a WhatsApp message, and I was just like, I can't. You know, I'm. I just can't. I can't show up for this workshop. I'm exhausted. I'm really sorry. And that was that. Like we had this exchange. She was like, "Yeah, okay, I get it." I walk into my co-working space 2 days later, and somebody said, "Man, like this person, she was like so upset. She was so down the other day because she was really frustrated with a whole bunch of stuff. But then she said she had a conversation with you, and she was so inspired." I'm like, "How was I inspiring?" I was like at the end of my tether saying no, and this this person in my co-working space was like, "Yes, but because you're modeling boundaries." And she said, "When you're not here, I can't tell you how many people say, I said no to this because that's what Netta would do. Or, I see Netta not doing the things that she doesn't want to do, and it's given me permission to do the same." And it's something I never see. And it's like, wow, that's
Mm.
the impact we have. And we don't always see it, but it makes a difference.
So just on that point, how do we manage that then with like responsibility? So for example, like in the
Mm.
past, I might have said yes to something and that been like beginning of the year, I'm still doing it. Let's just say it's like a long-term thing, but now I'm feeling like actually I don't want to do it anymore. But again,
Yeah.
that societal kind of pressure of like, but I said I would, I gave my word, I want to be an integral person, like
Mm.
integrity is actually
Yeah.
very important to me. And then like for me, I have like this battle in my head, right? Of like, oh, but my
Yeah.
energy is not there. Like, am I being, especially in like the culture we live in today, kind of a young person still, like class myself. Am I being flaky, right? So then you have like all these kind of things going on in my head, from
Yeah.
my
Oh, I know
experience,
that flaky
you
story.
know. So and so wisdom for how do we
Mm.
manage that when we are, let's call it like living the human design way?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I mean, it could be that, whatever it is, it could be you stepping out of it makes room for someone else to step into it who really wants to do it. That's one way to look at it. Sometimes we get into things and they run the course of time. And because everybody's running the story of like, we need to stick with it, we need to finish it, but nobody's heart is really in it, the thing just kind of sort of keeps tagging along, but it's fulfilled its purpose. So I've had something like that recently. So I've been in this mother-daughter group, so with other moms and their daughters, and it's all about like helping our kids transition into puberty. And we've done a lot of beautiful things. And when we started this, like I was really involved in like getting it off the ground and making sure that, we had the next thing planned or the next facilitator booked and all of those things. And we got to a point this year where like you could tell collectively our heart wasn't in it anymore. Like we'd struggle to find dates to do events, or we'd say, we need to meet up on this day to talk about it. And then two people couldn't make it. And it was just like energetically, it had gone flat. And to be fair, I mean, I think we spend a lot of time and effort trying to keep it going. But I felt myself becoming more and more frustrated, more and more frustrated with it, right? And with this sort of this event we were planning, and it was just not going anywhere. And then we had a date and we were going to make it happen. And then our facilitator actually called it off like a week and a half before the event. She was like, actually, we're not prepared enough. Instead of doing the event, let's just meet on this day to talk about when we're going to do it another time. And it was just like, you know what? I am done. I am done. Like nobody's heart is in it, but nobody's having the courage to say it. And I was just like, with love and grace, like I can't keep putting my energy into something that clearly doesn't want to happen anymore. So you guys go ahead, you do the event, I'm out. But I did it with a lot of compassion, and I didn't do it with anger. But once I did it, I felt so liberated. Like that feeling of liberation of like this energy drain is no longer in my life. It was really empowering. And
Hmm.
the people that are still plodding along with the event, they've said, you can still come and do the event with us. You don't need to do any planning, but it's still not happening. One person's telling me it's happening on this date. Another person said, oh, no, it's not that date. It's a different date. And the same energy is still playing out. And it's like, but nobody's doing itself any favors. And
Yeah.
I just feel like I've removed my energy, and that's a good thing for everyone, because it's also kind of signaling like, we're like running around in circles here. Like this is not a productive thing.
So it sounds like our what we are talking about beforehand in terms of that feeling, not self-theme, is one of the signals that we can start to pay attention to if we are giving our energy to
Yeah,
something and we feel like it's running, like running out of steam, or kind of we want what, like
yeah,
if we're becoming frustrated with the thing, like that's a signal that actually to pay attention to that and to change course,
yeah,
change direction, change thing, etc. That's kind of what it sounds like,
yeah,
um, from what we've kind of,
yeah.
for me
But when
trying
I,
to
for
put
example, in this example, when I said,
no, I was going to say, for me putting the pieces of the puzzle together, that's kind of what it sounds like, is that when
yeah,
when our not self theme starts to grow, that's a sign.
yeah. And also what you said earlier about like, maybe you're in a job and you do stuff that you don't want to do. I mean, that's, we're always going to have stuff in life that we don't want to do. If it's your job, it's like, what's the balance here? Like, how much am I doing that I really love? That's like giving me that
Mm,
satisfaction. That's like regenerating its own energy. Like, how much is that in my day or in my week versus the stuff I don't want to do? Is it a balance I'm happy with? Is it a balance I'm happy to accept? Is there anything I can do about the stuff I don't want to do to make it feel more fulfilling? But also, say you were looking for a different job at some point in the future, as we all will, like to me, understanding your human design, it puts you in a position where you can actually, like, in the process of looking for a role or in the interview process, you can go, right, these are my strengths. This is what I do. This is where I come to life. This is what I want to do for your company. This is what I don't do.
mm,
I know a manifester. She's a friend of a friend, and when I talked to her, she was like, man, I found out I'm a manifester. And I was really stifled in this role I was in, and I couldn't bring all of myself. And there wasn't room for my energy, like to be big when it's big and to be small when it's small. And she said, when I looked for a new job, I basically said, like, this is how I work. When I'm on, I'm on. I'm going to do a day's work for you in like a couple of hours. But then also, when my energy isn't there, I need room in this role to pull back.
mm,
I'm still working. It's not like I've gone to have like a nap for 3 days, but I'm not in this big outward capacity. This is what's good. This is like my best self. This is what I can do for your company. And they went, okay, fine, we'll make that happen. We'll find that balance.
oh,
But we
yeah,
kind of got to go first.
yeah. It's having the courage, isn't it, to kind of, as I kind of said beforehand, like live the human design way, as like I'm kind of calling it in my
Yeah,
mind. Um, so we've spoken about the not self theme, looking at the chart. And there's like the opposite of that, of when we are most
yeah,
in, when you're living your design. So for generators, that's feeling satisfied,
that's it.
which interesting. So I actually resonate with that quite a bit. Um,
Hmm.
where do you how do people like get this chart? Like, do they, because you said there's a lot of kind of stuff on the internet, do they have to go to a human design practitioner like yourself, or what are some ways how people can find out their human design?
Hmm.
Like, what's the process?
If you go online and you Google human design chart, there'll be lots of different softwares where you can get free charts.
Hmm.
If you feel inclined, if you want to go to empowered human design /chart, that's my website. What I've tried to do with the chart is, I mean, it's still, I can't change the look of the chart. I can't change the terminology. I'm choosing not to change the terminology. I could, but I'm sticking with the standard human design terminology, because if you find out you're a generator and then you go on somebody else's website and they call it something else, it's not helpful, because then you have to work out what the correlation is, right? But what I've very much tried to do with my chart is I've tried to put it in language that's easier to understand. So for example, if you look at your chart where it says how you make decisions by listening to your gut feeling, a typical human design chart would say authority, sacral. And then you go, well, what does that mean? Well, it means that you make decisions by following your gut feeling. So in
It's
these
interesting,
very, very
actually.
small ways, I've tried to make the chart a little bit more relatable, a little bit more informative. But you can go to any chart software, any website that you feel called to.
Interesting, yeah, because I think I first actually discovered human design like probably when I started one of my first podcasts. We had a guy on, and I had the chart, and then yeah, it was like sacral, and then like you have like this chart next to it, and you're like, huh, and, you're trying to make sense of it. So just those small tweaks you've made, actually, I think is really valuable to people to start to understand the chart better. Sorry.
I was going to say that the language is often not maybe as inviting as it should be. But to me, I really like to think of it like it's a different language to understand yourself. And once you know what it means, like authority, what the heck? Like, but once you know it means like how you're meant to make decisions, you can relate to it in a different way and you can apply it in your life in a different way.
So just really quickly, kind of on this. So um, so on the chart towards the kind of how I'm looking at it, towards the left, you've kind of got like this. You've got the design, the personality, with the kind of with all
Hmm.
the different kind of numbers, etc. I think kind of all of that might actually confuse people. So um, when we're looking at this chart, is what's like the most important thing we look at? Is it the on the right where it's got energy type and kind of understanding that more
Mm,
than the actual kind of the drawing on the left when we're first
yeah.
getting into human design? Would that be your recommendation to people?
Yes. Yeah. So if you can
Yeah.
focus on your energy type and what's called your strategy. So the strategy is the best way to use your energy, and your authority, which is how you make decisions. If you can focus on those things, that's the basis, that's the foundation of it all. The graph, like the abstract that has, all the numbers and that has the shapes and the colors, there's tons of value in that. But if you're just starting out and you don't want to overwhelm yourself, work with your energy type, work with, your best way of exchanging energy and your best way to make decisions. The shapes are all about different energetic themes. And when you have something that's colored in those shapes, it means you have consistent energy, consistent access to that energy. And when it's white, it means that you're much more open to the energy of your environment. So that's really valuable to know in terms of like you being out in the world. So the colored areas are more like where you influence people, and the white areas are more like where you're open to being influenced by others. Not in a controlling way, but just where you're picking up on other people's energy.
Amazing. I'm sure we could have went a lot deeper kind of into this, been here for hours. There's the profile, there's the
Yeah.
your strongest sense, which for generators, mine is touch. So I'm sure we could have went a lot into that, but I think giving people kind of like the overview of human design and that energy type, I think, is really important for people to understand. So where do people go to keep in touch with yourself, your work, and to explore human design further if they are inspired by our conversation today? Where's the best place they go and keep in touch
I'm
to?
naturally happiest on Instagram.
Hmm.
So on Instagram, I'm at Empowered Human Design. I will occasionally hang out on LinkedIn, but my heart isn't particularly in it, if truth be told. And I'm not really on Facebook anymore either. So Instagram is my happy place, or you can pop over to my website, which is empoweredhumandesign.com. And that's where you can run your chart. And that's where you can also, hit the little Insta button if you feel so inclined. But yeah,
And what
my
would be
invitation will be playful with it, be curious about it. But it's not dogmatic. It's not another box to put yourself in. It's meant to be a tool to help you understand yourself better, and drop some of those ideas and inner voices, and that pressure to be something other than who you are.
amazing? Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure we will do this again. As I said, there was a lot of things we didn't speak about when it comes to
Yeah.
human design, but I feel I got most of my questions answered on generators, so hopefully that's going to help the generators out there and kind of give context for people who are different energy types as well. What would be your final thought, parting message with our audience today?
Ooh, that's interesting. I think it would just be about like, life is fast paced. Life can be hard. Life is like serious. It's this invitation to just come to it with a bit more lightness, like come to our human experience with a bit more lightness, and see the beauty in it, see the joy in it. Like I can be bouncing around and going, I'm in love with life today. Doesn't mean that my life is perfect at all. Doesn't mean that, I don't have problems or issues, but it's kind of like connecting with that that magic of like that feeling of being alive in spite of life itself.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I've definitely learned a lot about human design in general, but also my energy type, and giving myself permission to, I've said it a few times, live the human design way. And I feel
Yeah.
like I've started that journey before our conversation today, just over the conversations I've had of living more mindfully and kind of
Yeah.
going with my energy more, and not judging myself for doing that, not feeling bad about doing that. And I think that's something that a lot of people can feel and experience, right? Because as we've been speaking about the
Yeah.
social conditioning that we have also all are exposed to. So thank you once again. I will link all your websites and socials down below. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, I have thoroughly enjoyed myself. I have had fun. My energy feels really buoyant. So it's been, my body is telling me that it's been a great exchange, and I'm really grateful for the time with you, Luke,
Excellent. Thank you for your time.
and for the work that you're doing.
I hope that you've enjoyed my conversation with Nette Hargreaves, where we've been exploring human design from what it is to why it matters to how to live a human design inspired life. The main lesson that I've learned from Nette today is how to use human design as a framework for understanding myself and others, by understanding where we get our energy from and using this to live our very best lives possible. What are you taking away from this episode, and what positive changes are you going to make as a result? Leave a comment or review below this episode, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I read every comment and review and appreciate you being here. I look forward to sharing the next episode with you really, really soon. See you then.